Amateur Girl and Fanboy present the Big Bad Glass Movie Review.
Oh, hello. Hello, everyone. I guess you can guess from my binoculars. This is Fanboy, and this is Amateur Girl, somewhere near Hollywood. I'm Fanboy in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I guess you can see from my binoculars, we're going to be reviewing one of my all-time favorites, I don't know if say that, it's not The Rear Window, it's Rear Window. Alfred Hitchcock's Rear Window, which has been mine countless times for its, influence. It's a very influential film, as most people know. Made in 1954, Jimmy Stewart and Grace Kelly. And Jimmy Stewart was probably old enough to be Grace Kelly's grandfather. She had it. We're going to dive right in because I know the thing about Rear Window, I know a lot about it. And I know a lot about Hitchcock, and I know a lot about the actors who starred in it. So I grew up in that era. But I think before I run my mouth about all this stuff, we'll let Amateur Girl, as the casual viewer once again, see how she felt about this old chestnut, as I like to call it. The old chestnut, the old standard, as one of the old standards from Hollywood. What she thought about it before I say anything else.
Yeah, no, it was a really beautiful film. I looked at it as like I was watching a play, like on a live production on stage. When I watched old films when I was young, I don't watch them so much anymore, but when I was young, I watched them all the time. They're usually musicals, so I usually avoided older movies that were just, without music. But it was a beautiful film. I mean, the costumes, is it set in that time period that it was?
Yeah, 1954. I remember Mom. I have pictures of, I'm sure Mom wore clothes like that, and Dad.
Yeah, it reminded me of pictures of them. So it actually reminded me of our parents. So that was so cool to watch, like the way that people dressed back then. And then, of course, I was also thinking of it in a social aspect. Is that what you would say about the women in the film and the way they were portrayed? But I was also thinking, first of all, it pissed me off.
Remember, it's Hitchcock.
Yeah.
And that's what he does. And we talked about that when we did 39 Steps.
Really bothers me. But then again, also for time, right? So that's women stayed at home.
I think for the time, he was pushing the envelope pretty hard. Yeah. And he always did. I mean, look at Psycho. That was a big push on the envelope of sex and violence in the early 60s. So he always pushed the envelope as hard as he could without getting like censored for it, right?
Yeah, and I felt that even now. And then the story was just perfection, and the actually I really noticed I don't know if this is a thing, but just like the noise, the background noise that he had, I thought was very
everything about this is a masterpiece.
Yeah. I mean, just the honking of the horns and just things that were so small but so noticeable. The small things I felt like really stood out.
Yeah, well, it's probably his first, I would say. But a lot of people like Rebecca, which was made in the 40s. That was like his first big Hollywood movie that he got Academy Awards for. A strange gothic tale. It's not one of my favorite Hitchcock movies, but a lot of people like it. And there's a lot of movies in the 40s that were really great. But then when he went to color, because in the 50s everything started going to color and Technicolor and all that stuff, and he had not really done much of that until I think Rear Window, and because most of his movies were black and white before this, and he used it phenomenally, right? He used the sound, we talked
Detail.
about how. We talked to how they were locked down in the 30s with all that sound stuff, and now he's free with the camera. The camera's flowing around the apartment building. You actually become one with Jeffries, who was the photographer, right? You kind of get in his, and we can talk about all that stuff in a second. But go ahead, continue.
Well, I'm really just going to finish in the fact that this one actually did make me think. Like, I could actually sit there and think you could watch this numerous times, and I actually would enjoy talking about the layers of this film, because I as a casual viewer actually did feel that and see that. And there's so many things you could talk about. I mean, you could just go on and on and on, I'm sure,
Right.
about this film.
And
Yeah. And so oh, and then just Grace Kelly, I just will finish with this. What the hell is he thinking that he wasn't interested in being with her? I mean,
well,
come on.
like I said, Jimmy Stewart could have been her grandfather. He was like almost all of her leading men that she had, and she was romantically involved with most all of her leading men, except for Jimmy Stewart. But I mean, even the other, because I think it was because he was old enough to be her grandfather, and the other men were just old enough to be her father. I mean, she was not old. She was fairly
She was in
young.
her 20, like
I think she was in her
mid-20s or something.
20s. She was
Yeah.
picked by her high school somewhere in Pennsylvania. She was picked by her high school as most likely to become a movie star.
Well,
High school, you know.
yeah.
She's just beautiful.
I mean,
and she's so cute. How could they kill a little dog? It's like, who would kill a little dog? I said, that's so cute. I had to keep running that back and forth.
but just, I mean, you could talk about the relationship between those two. You could, I mean, there's just so many things you could talk
Right.
about in this film. So
the main theme, of course, is the psychological darkness of it. That here's a guy. Now, of course, they picked the character development perfectly, because he's an adrenaline junkie. You know, he's a war photographer, adrenaline junkie. So he had to be an adrenaline junkie. I think that he was at a car race and he got his leg broken and he's taking pictures. He's a photographer, and again, so he's a voyeur already. And here's a guy who's an adrenaline junkie and a voyeur, stuck in a wheelchair, looking out the back window. What else is he gonna do? Someone like that has to look at everybody, because that's his job. That's what he does, and he's got to keep excited somehow. And then, of course, he comes across that dreadful situation, right? So the whole thing, he's kind of morally corrupted himself, right? I love Thelma Ritter, who played his nurse. She was like a national treasure, right? She did a lot of Hitchcock movies. After this, a few years later, Jimmy Stewart did Vertigo, which is considered Hitchcock's best movie. It's a very strange film, but it's one of those, again, sometimes it's number one. When people pick the number one movies of all time, it usually goes between Citizen Kane and Vertigo. Those two movies, they flip back and forth a lot, always in the top three. So Vertigo, if you've never seen Vertigo, you have to see that. That's incredible. But Rear Window, you get the psychological darkness of the guy who's just staring at in his neighbor's windows, which is creepy right there. But what and the people have written books about it, so I'm not even going to discuss that too much. What I got out of it, which I haven't seen too many people talk about, I mean, again, this is the TV era is just beginning. So the TV's like a little box that people stare into. We stare into our phones today like little windows.
Yeah.
Right? People we as humans, we like to stare. We'll stop and look at train wrecks. I mean, so when this horrible thing happens, if you haven't seen Rear Window, I'm trying not to give away too much.
Oh no, you should. Come on, please.
Well, when he hears when he hears that scream at night, let's put it that way, that got his attention, right? Now he had something. Now as adrenaline junkie and a photographer, he had something to do because he's been bored for so long, right? So, but what I got of it was Hitchcock was basically was a bit of a philosopher. He was a film philosopher. He approached all of his movies as an experiment. Here's something that's never been done before. What would happen if I do this? And he would, in almost every movie you could find, you find an experimentation going on that directors will take and steal from over and over again. Spielberg is considered the number 2 maker of thrillers, by AFI or whoever, American Film Institute, but he's always number 2 to Hitchcock, because basically Spielberg steals a lot of Hitchcock stuff. I see it over and over in Spielberg's movies. He's taken scenes out of, well, he steals from a lot of different directors, right, and recycles it. But what I got out of it is and I don't know if this was his reason for doing it. I think the idea just shooting it all in one spot and trying to make it interesting. And he'd done that before with other movies where he just shoots it all in one spot, where they'd have literally there was one movie he made called Rope. The entire movie shot in one take about two gay guys that strangle some guy to death. This is a movie made, I think that might have been his first color movie. It was made in the 40s, late 40s, I think.
Wow.
Were
they openly gay?
No, not openly gay, of course not, but it's obvious. And the whole movie is shot in one long take, and they had to practice moving the walls away so the camera could go through into the,
Wow.
and so it was an experiment. Was it successful? It wasn't as successful as Rear Window. This is probably one of his more successful movies. That and The Birds and Psycho, of course. But Rear Window is a standout. But he had a lot of really standouts. But this still holds up pretty well, I thought. Again, like you said, I like looking at the costumes. I love Grace Kelly. I thought Jimmy Stewart was a little bit too old for the part, but they always put him in these parts where he's too old for him. But, is what it is. Hitchcock only worked with three, especially in the 50s. He worked with three leading actors. He worked with Henry Fonda, Jimmy Stewart, and Cary Grant. And he didn't like to work with, he said, I'm not here to teach acting lessons. This is not my job. You can't. If you're going to sit, he didn't like method actors. If you're going to sit around and think about how you're going to approach the scene, I'm not interested. I don't have time for all that. That's the way he felt, right? So he just wanted a good, strong movie stars that are just going to say their lines and get on with it, right? And not all this craziness like Brando and stuff that put their directors through. So, it still holds up. But again, I'm still trying to get back to what I think. And like I said, I've never read this, never seen it, but I picked up on this when I was watching the movie. And again, I don't know if Hitchcock wanted to do this or not. But what I see was that here we've got the sound film. Like you said, the sounds are so nice. But then you see all these little vignettes, almost like a silent movies going on in each little apartment. And you're following the little stories all the way through to the end of the movie, right? And each of them have a little punchline, which some of them are hysterically funny, right? Like the short little soldier. and Miss Lonely Hearts, right?
Yeah.
And all that
That's
stuff.
right.